You're listening to Seminary Dropout, episode 49, and I'm your host, Shane Blackshear. This week on the show, I'll be talking to Michael Leary of the review blog Filmwell. Listen more on this week's episode of Seminary Dropout. Let's go. Friends, welcome to the show. Starting this week, I'm going to do something different. I'm going to save everything that I usually say before the interview till after the interview. And it's going to be this way from now on. And I just want this to be a place where if someone comes for the very first time, they're not distracted by all the stuff, no matter how great it is, that I say before the interview. So we're going to go straight to the interview, but you have to promise you stay till the end and hear what else I have to say. This week on the show, we'll be going full out geek. We're going to be talking about AMC's Mad Men. Now, if you haven't seen Mad Men, I highly recommend it. It's a great show, and it shows depravity in the clearest way possible. That's all I'll say about the show, but my interview today is with Michael Leary, who wrote a great series of blog posts about Mad Men, and I was so impressed with them that I decided to have him here on the show to talk about it. Michael Leary is an adjunct instructor of religious studies at Fontbonne University, as well as being a lecturer at Emmaus Bible College in Sydney, Australia. So naturally, I had him on here to talk about AMC's Mad Men. Well, Michael Leary, thanks for joining me on the podcast today.
I'm really appreciative of your offer.
So, you and I came in contact because you wrote a post on a blog called Filmwell. Real quick, what's Filmwell about, and what do you write on there?
Filmwell has actually been around for quite a while. We put it together as a bit of a sandbox for a number of film and cultural critics that have been writing from a theological perspective for quite a while. We wanted to have a place where we could explore new ways of writing about cinema and television, a place where we could experiment with honing our craft. We've been around, I think, now for about 5 years or so. We mainly cover cinema, international and independent cinema at Filmwell, with a variety of other things thrown in for good measure. Pretty much anything that piques our fancy that can appear on a screen.
That's cool. And you're somehow connected to the film festival that's in St. Louis, where you are as well. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah, through the local church I belong to, we actually have created a prize for local filmmakers that we award every year. We seek to become part of our film culture in St. Louis, throw actual cash money at people that are doing good work and want to continue on in thinking about the human condition in St. Louis terms through cameras and scripts. And so far, that's been a very rewarding occupation. That's
very cool. So you're like a bona fide cinephile, like you're card carrying and everything.
Well, that's a wonderful thing about cinema, and if I could speak about cinema and theology together at the same time, there's been a wonderful culture of film watchers that have developed over the past decade, and I want to use the term amateur film watchers in the best sense of the term. That if you take the word from its Latinic root, that the word amateur actually just refers to someone that loves to do something so much that they do it as frequently as possible. And there's a large audience of amateur film lovers that I think have learned over the years that cinema and what happens in a cinema is a great way to think about God and time and space and explore some avenues of emerging theology that fit well with form and image.
That's really cool. And that's kind of what we're here to talk about, because you have been posting some reviews of episodes of the last 3 episodes of Mad Men. I am a huge fan of Mad Men, and, there's tons of, spiritual things, spiritual lessons you could take from Mad Men. But I particularly like your post, and you posted one recently about the presence of allusions to the Psalms in Mad Men and different scripture, which was particularly beautiful. And, there's a lot of those, like, the gospel of whatever, a movie, a TV show, and that kind of
Yes.
stuff. And we can glean a lot from that, but yours was a little more laser focused. Talk just a little bit about what that post was about.
Yeah, I have an academic interest in odd appearances of biblical imagery and reference in places that you would least expect them to appear. I'm actually working on a book for Cascade Press on odd Jesus imagery at the moment. And one of the places I least expected to see profound biblical reference was from Don Draper, of all people. And there's been a few points in the Mad Men corpus where there have been not just really interesting biblical references, but from a script writing perspective, biblical references that have been dropped in with a great deal of what seems to be theological acuity. Most recently in season 7, of course, we have the now famous reference to breaking of bread in a conversation between Peggy and Don that then after a few edits turns into an actual breaking of bread scene that closes out the episode as they sit together and embody this very paradoxical form of fellowship and family that Peggy and Don and Pete have forged over their time working on ad strategy and ad copy. Which often banks on family images to sell stuff to people. So that's one example. And then very early on in Mad Men, the first season of this show is really, I've been watching it ever since it began airing. And the first season of Mad Men is just, it's a gripping experience of television. Even if you're going back and starting the show now, sewn throughout season 1 are these wonderful moments of cinema, these beautiful, almost Walker Percy-like images of being lost in the 50s and 60s in this era of transition for American culture. But a few episodes in an episode called Babylon, you find Don Draper in Greenwich Village in this smoky bar with a bunch of beatniks and proto-hippies. And it's an open mic night where there's some pretty bad poetry that happens, but then right at the and with Don as the audience, we're kind of internally groaning. But then this trio steps up and performs this beautiful version of a psalm that references Zion. It's actually the lyrics derive from a very well-known a cappella composition. In that moment, you have Don sitting here with this beautiful drift of psalm floating over this smoky room, and you hear the psalmist, from the deepest recesses of longing, talking about what it's like to be in exile, and when they were, in Babylon, they hung their harps. This is a very familiar image to readers of the Psalms, and thinking of Dawn in those terms was an alarmingly profound theological experience. So with Mad Men, once we got that very direct reference to breaking of bread, I decided it was time to go back and start thinking through some other references to Mad Men to key scriptural quotations.
Yeah, and so for anyone listening who's not, I mean, this is officially your spoiler warning. We're gonna go there, so just know that. And anyone who hasn't watched Mad Men, you should go watch Mad Men. This is a show about a profoundly broken human being in his journey, and it's interesting how even after all this time, somehow we find ourselves still rooting for him at all, really, because he is so he has messed his life up so badly and treated people in his life so badly. What other like spiritual lessons or theological lessons have you gleaned from Mad Men throughout the years?
Well, I think the narrative of Dawn is a good place to start, because there's nothing in the bulk of the seasons, there's nothing rewarding about Don Draper. He becomes quite wealthy through discovering that he's very adept at writing ad copy and pitching ad ideas to people. And as his career blossoms and he begins banking cash money, we see Don just change as a human being. His descent into alcoholism is particularly hard to watch. And one aspect I think that Mad Men's been very, very good at capturing is the way that a human body actually changes over time. When you get to the end of season 6, an alarming thing happens. Don Draper, that being the beautiful human who is John Hamm, according to my wife, he ceases to actually look handsome. He loses that edge in his jaw. His face is modeled with the hypertension you experience as an alcoholic, and he's sweaty and he's kind of half shaven, and you realize, with this close up on Don's face, that you've watched 6 years of this beautiful man actually becoming something that's unpleasant to even be around physically. And those of us who have experienced this in real life can connect to that instantly, that we have people in our lives that we're close to, and we watch them make bad choices, or we watch terrible, terrible things happen to them in life, and they break, and they drop out. They find themselves reliant on chemicals or various addictions or whatever it might be, just to pass through these difficult spots in their life. We've all experienced that in some respect. And we feel such a sorrow and loss when that happens to someone that's close to us. And the screenwriters with Mad Men have taken us as the audience through that process with Don. So even though there's nothing rewarding about Don, of course we've always been in his corner. He's a great anti-hero, and we've been schooled on how it is that we're supposed to root for Don throughout the season. But then, it's just become too much for us. So by the end of season 6, it's we feel a certain agony that we've lost something about Don that we really were attracted to, that we found inviting about him. And now in season 7, Don's kind of bounced back. Don's taken the power back in a few respects. We're wondering what's going to happen next. We're not quite sure. Obviously, this mid-season finale was wonderfully ambiguous, and we can talk about that if you'd like. But that's another element of the show that I think is important from a spiritual perspective. That it's a show that takes seriously the holistic nature of degradation. A lot of shows make it really, they play this character card in which someone goes off the rails, and it's usually played out in bad dramaturgy. For example, this is a terrible example, but I'm going to use it. And Saved by the Bell. We all remember that episode where Jesse gets hooked in amphetamines. Remember?
I'm so excited.
That's exactly right. And that's a terrible example of how sitcoms or usual television shows play out this someone going off the rails trope. But Mad Men has done it in a way that I think it really mimics the experience we have of that kind of loss in real life. So, as someone that's active in church, that takes the pastoral experience of being with someone who's struggling, or even myself, as I've been through very difficult circumstances in life, and people have been with me in those, bearing those burdens with me. Mad Men almost has that a pastoral tone to it in that respect, that the screenwriters are fully aware that this world that they're spinning together each episode is an act of pastoral concern almost. What's going to happen next with Don, I'm not sure, but that's one, I think, that sense of patience that's required of the viewer to fully understand what's happening to the characters and to the show, I think is another element that's important for us to respect. People love Breaking Bad. It's a great show. It's got a lot of wonderful compositional hooks. The aesthetic to it's very appealing, and it's a story extremely well told. Of course, the script writing is spot on in almost every circumstance. But the problem with Breaking Bad is that it ends up, I think, just being more entertainment than anything. Even a Dickensian sort of entertainment. It wears its differentiation between good and evil on its sleeve. It's very simplistic in that respect. We know who the good guys are, we know who the bad guys are, and there's really not much nuance. And that's okay. I'm not saying that's a bad approach to script writing. But with Mad Men, we lose our bearings in terms of being able to evaluate morally what's going on and how we're supposed to perceive these characters. The screenwriters don't dictate who it is we're supposed to be rooting for, who it is we're supposed to think is acting correctly and even virtuously, and who isn't. They're simply acting. And there's a wonderful interview with Matthew Weiner, who's the driving force behind Mad Men in the Paris Review about 2 months ago. And the interviewer asks him, "How do you decide what happens to your characters? What's your process like?" Because often Mad Men episodes end up in endings that are non-endings, or they end up in places we least expect them to go, like Don just going to get a cup of coffee. And Matthew Weiner, his response was pretty short and to the point. He just said, "I these are humans. We script what human beings seem to do." And the last sentence of the response is, "This is just where the characters go."
Yeah.
And I think we can understand that, just as human beings, that we can't predict our responses all the time. We can't. I can't really give you a script of what my day is going to look like tomorrow, or even what my day is going to end like today. And I like that sense of a very humane sense of reality that's brought to the way Mad Men works. We're not quite sure where it goes in the same way. We're not quite sure how we put the pieces of our own life together at times.
Yeah, to your point about it being true to life, there's been several points in the series where Don will get close to hitting bottom, and then he'll say, I've gotta get this drinking under control," or I cannot cheat on my wife anymore. I'm not going to do that anymore." And for a while, he keeps it up, and is this man that we really, really want him to be. I think even like almost the entirety of I guess it was the 5th season, where Don's kind of a stand-up guy. He doesn't cheat on his wife. He really doesn't misbehave in any way, and the drama is really going on around him. But I knew there was too much time left in the series for that to keep up.
Yes, yeah.
And that's kind of how I feel now. You talked about where it left off. So for those listening, and I'll publish this in a time where this is still true because we've got plenty of time. So we're AMC split up the last season into 2 parts. So we just finished the first part, and we've got to wait a whole other year for that last half of the season. They did the same thing with Breaking Bad. I feel like it ended, you're right, it was somewhat ambiguous, but for the most part, kind of on an up note. He's not about to lose his job that we know of. He's really he's turned some things around like he has before. To me, in this first half of the season, the inciting incident of the whole season, or the pinnacle of the whole season, was when Freddie Rumsen gives him a pep talk after he's down in the dumps. And it really turns around after that conversation. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I do, yes. Yeah, certainly.
And so I feel as though it ended roughly on an up note, which I was kind of surprised, because I feel like if it's going to end in some sort of redemption for Don Draper at the end, I don't know how they're going to sustain that through those last 6 or 7, I guess, more episodes without him crashing again in the meantime. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah. And there's a certain kind of expectation, I suppose, that goes into Mad Men with the way the seasons have always panned out, and that we're following the vicissitudes of Don Draper as his fortunes rise and fall both materially and existentially, because Don's always been for us this existential stand-in for America in this grand transitional state from something resolutely post-war modern to something that's a little bit trickier and a bit more ambiguous. And as we head into the end of the 60s, that mirrors what's happening in Christian theology really well, where we begin to see, figures like Altizer gain in popularity with his suggestion that God is dead. entering into these phases of Protestant liberalism that look a lot different from the theology of American Christianity during the period between the two wars. So everything is just kind of cattywampus at this point, for Don and for all of those around him, in every way that we can really think of. So at this point in Mad Men, there's no sense of direction. There's no way to predict which way this is going to turn. And I think that is a testament to their creative abilities. That even at this date in the screenwriting process, as like you and I were veteran viewers, and we've developed sort of trust in the script as it pans out. What's next? It's what I think what I'm grateful for about Mad Men is that's not a question that I really think about.
Yeah.
In terms that what this has become is this episodic pattern of wish fulfillment. Shows like Lost really monopolized on the typical TV viewer's addiction to using these half-hour or hour segments of getting their what's next question filled. It's a little proxy for the ambiguities we experience every day. It's our way to feel like at least there's something in our life that's neatly packaged and connected, and we walk away from our TiVos, feeling a bit more put together than we did in our commute home. And Mad Men refuses to give us that therapy. A lot of people were mad, I think, at this Bert Cooper song and dance routine, this bodily resurrection of Bert Cooper to Don Draper. A lot of people found it nonsensical and jarring and weird and even atypical for this series. But with you, I found it this beautiful moment, perhaps the first moment in the entire series of actual refuge for Don Draper. I can't think of another time where we've been able to see Don in the middle of the frame, actually having someone speak truth into his life in such a way that he's grateful for it and that he's actually fed by it. The acting that goes into that moment of the pose of Don's body and just the ripples of emotion across his face, that few seconds of the camera on Don's face, I think, are perhaps the most beautifully constructed few seconds of the show to date. Just what's expressed in Don's almost a sense of relief that he has, that Bert Cooper has just told him, Don, the best things in life are free. And it almost seems as if in that little interlude, Don feels a bit free from something, which is not something we've seen in Don Draper, I think, ever before. If you can think of a moment, I can't actually. Going back,
not in that way.
Yeah,
I think there's been times where he is the immediacy of his being trapped is not so heavy, like in that season where he was behaving himself.
Yeah.
But yeah, that scene, I love that scene. There's something beautiful about it. And John Hamm's acting, like you're saying, it was fantastic. His eyes shrink wrapped in tears. It was something amazing. So
yeah.
Yeah,
and I guess there's been times throughout the narrative where Don has been a bit more free to do and accomplish what it is he wants to do, but at just this very human existential level, that was, I think, the closest we've seen to a moment of clarity for Don Draper. This loss of Bert Cooper is staggering for him. It's the person who in the office really knows who he is, who's his connection to a real sense of past or history, because we know, of course, Don Draper doesn't actually really have one. Mm-hmm. He has a multitude of these scripted narratives that he's used as his own artificial past. Part of that, is, of course, what makes him such a good advertiser. But that moment of clarity, I think, is worth watching the entirety of Mad Men from beginning to end. Just even that look on Don's face. But I think that is well connected to a moment earlier in the season where he's on the airplane next to a widow played by Neve Campbell, who's just lost her husband to alcoholism, which you gather through some subtle nuances in the conversation. And Don confesses to her that he is a broken vessel, which is
It
another
feels like he broke the vessel, right?
yeah, that's right, which is another snippet of psalmic language. And that as well, I think, is kind of a tipping point for Don in terms of confession.
Hmm.
There's almost a repentant tone to continue the Davidic allusions there. There's almost a repentant tone to that he's this broken person,
Yeah.
pieces that can't be put back together. Whatever fills Don leaks out as quickly as it enters him. He's just this hollow, broken thing. And then here's Bert Cooper telling him, Don, this isn't all there is. That you've made it this far, and the best things in life are free. Obviously free in the sense that they don't cost anything, but there's a wonderful double entendre there because they're also free in the sense that they're not beholden to structures of power and structures of commerce, these things that have dominated Don's biography for so many years.
That's great. I haven't thought about that, the double meaning there. There's one of the other recurring themes in Mad Men is that Don is a man who things are changing around him and he's not changing with them, and it's embodied most in the fashion. So this series started in 1960. That was the time of the first season, and now we're in 1969. The fashion is radically changed. I mean, it was classic styling in the 1960s, and then it's more of the kind of, it's very much influenced by hippie culture and, bright colors, very wide lapels,
Yeah.
big collars, things like that. Everyone around him is now wearing that. Their hair's shaggy. They've got sideburns. Don looks just as he did in 1960, which is a great trick because he still gets to be cool to us because that looks cool to us. Well, everyone around him looks ridiculous to us.
Yes. Yeah.
But in his time, he's quickly becoming an anachronism. What do you think? Like, how does that fit into Don's story and what's that say about him?
It fits into Don's story because what's happening in Mad Men is a really creative form of historiography, and that the story of the 60s are being retold through the lens of this ad agency on Madison Avenue, and the way that these different characters, the different employees and partners interrelate. And through that, we get to see the kinds of gender and racial tensions we'd expect to see in the 60s. We've also, tracked through the main historical events of the 60s because Mad Men is very careful to make reference to things that are happening as they go along. And what we find with the unchangeable Don, the immutable Don, from a sartorial perspective at least, is he's become for us a way to measure the instability of the era, that there's a certain kind of texture or mood that's part of change. I'm sure all of us as adult listeners have probably felt that at some point in some recent technological transitions, or the way that media has changed, or the way that some of our literary habits are changed. We know we're personally aware that things are a bit different than they used to be, and we feel a cognitive dissonance when we encounter those differences, whatever they might be. For Don, we're seeing that on a large scale. And I think Don is a way for us as an audience to perceive Mad Men as a period piece in a really cool way. It's a period piece about this era, crafted in such a way that we can feel that sense, that mood of change. It's unsettling. It's uprooting. What we expect to find in a period piece, like let's take Downton Abbey for example. In period pieces, we tend to want to revisit an era. We want to see what people were like, how they were different from us. And the period piece becomes this neat little box by which we can compare ourselves to a past era. Mad Men is not a neat little box like that, because what it's showing us is that we're not different from the characters in this drama. They do have these gender tensions and sexual politics and racial tensions, and there's a massive imbalance between the poor and the rich that's at the base of Mad Men, really. And none of that is any different from the types of sexual politics and race politics and differences between the middle and upper classes and lower classes that we experience today. They're really not that different. in fact, there's nothing that different at all about these people. We have the same experiences when we go to work. We have the same experiences when we talk to our wives and our husbands and our friends, etc. And that's a bit, I think, unsettling to the very careful viewer, that we're watching a period piece that eliminates that sense of distance, which makes the experience of Don's degradation even more immediate to us. And we can't really make fun of Pete as this kind of 60s relic, because there's a lot of Pete in the way that business works today. And so what emerges then from Mad Men as a period piece, and through the lens of Don's immutability, which becomes a canvas for it, is a wonderful evocation of that unsettling mood of change that we call progress, because things do progress, but we're caught in it. And that mood or that texture of change is something that's actually very important to contemporary theology's perspective on differences between secular modernism and postmodern discourses that alter and shift the way in which we perceive God's presence in our life, and the language that we use for things like redemption and the hypostatic union and the presence of Christ in the church. That I think one thing Mad Men helps us understand is that we need to be sensitive to that mood or texture of change, understand from where it emerges, and sometimes why it feels unsettling. And then there's a great question that emerges from Mad Men from that perspective, which is feeling unsettled by change a bad thing, or being uprooted by the transition from one era to the next a bad thing? Which is also a question that is of great import for contemporary ecclesiology, of course. So I think there's a lot of connections that can be made from Mad Men as a well-crafted period piece about the mood and sense and texture of change, to now, where we're experiencing quite vivid changes in society and church and theology.
Okay, last question, just kind of more of a fun one. A lot of people are suspecting that Don's going to die at some point. You think this is going to happen last episode?
I don't want to say or think anything. And I think a freeing thing about the quality era of television is that we don't have to have those conversations about TV all the time. What do you think's going to happen next? We're not stuck in this How I Met Your Mother echo chamber wherein the show actually becomes about that. That's a savvy little media trick, I think, is if you can make your show work in such a way that people think of it as a puzzle,
sure,
then you instantly become part of people's conversations.
Yeah.
And you keep your show at the forefront of what people are talking about, and the recap culture becomes a more important part of how the TV process works. And in Mad Men, I think the show is so unpredictable in the way that it's panned out that, I think it's interesting to entertain those questions. And of course, since the very first episode of Mad Men, I've, the image of a man falling from a building that looks an awful lot like Don Draper has always been at the forefront of our expectations for where everything's going. So I'm not sure. I'm apprehensive, but I'm warily interested in seeing how this all pans out, in the same way that I'm warily interested in seeing how the lives of people that around me that are really struggling will pan out.
Yeah. There's a part of me that was frustrated that we had to wait a year for the next season, and then there's a part of me that was really glad that I was going to have this in my life for another year.
Yeah, I'm with you on that.
Yeah, so I can appreciate that. Well, Michael, thanks so much for joining me. I've had such a fun time, and thanks.
Yeah, I appreciate you inviting me to be part of your wonderful podcast.
It was nice to get a fix in a summer without Mad Men. Remember, all past episodes of Seminary Dropout are for free and online at seminarydropout.com, and also on iTunes. Speaking of iTunes, I want to take the time to thank the Simple Living Works, Looney Lutheran, and Battle Tortoise for leaving a review on iTunes and a rating. Please, if you haven't done that, I would encourage you to go to iTunes, leave a rating and review, and especially subscribe if you've not subscribed in iTunes. We're getting close to 100 ratings and reviews on iTunes. I guess just ratings. Yeah, close to 100 ratings, and so that's kind of cool. Thank you also for those of you who listen to Stitcher and any other way. If I've got no record of it, that's fine. Thank you for listening however you listen. I greatly appreciate it. Be sure to check out the show notes for this show, where I'll have links to where Michael is online and where you can watch Mad Men. You can find that at shaneblackshear.com/Michael Leary. That's shaneblackshear.com/Michael Leary. All right, friends, that does it for this week at Seminary Dropout. Stay tuned next week for another great episode of Seminary Dropout.
When I can